Hi, it's Papa Joe. I'm here with the second installation of my new series on winemaking that we're putting on YouTube. We'll also put it on Facebook. Um, but today I want to talk to you about making red wine. Whether you're a home winemaker or a commercial winemaker, I think the principles are the same. Um, and the important things don't change whether you're doing 5 gallons a year or 1,000 gallons a year or 10,000 gallons a year. The first principle of making good wine, red or white, is to get your hands on the absolute best grapes that you possibly can and don't F it up. Those of you who know me have not heard me say F it up before. They've heard me say the other word, but Katie won't let me say it on this video because it's probably not good for our image on YouTube, although I've done it before, but that's a different story. So anyway, when you're making red grapes or red wine, it's really much better if you make it from grapes than from the juice. I mean, you can get red juice down in the Strip District at many different places, and you can get really good red grape juice at Ronnie's and Mario's down at Consumer Produce. But if you really want to make a good red wine, you really have to use a grape. It just really surprises me. In this area, you'd never see this in California, but in this area, even some of the commercial wineries are using juice. And, you know, far be it from me to criticize my competition, but you know what? I'm sorry, I just think if you're doing that, you're missing the boat. And the reason that you're missing the boat is red wine and white wine are two different things. Now, whites we always make from juice, and I'll cover that in a different video. But red wine is more of a complex beverage. And the complexity doesn't come from the juice, it comes from the skins and actually even from the seeds. So if you really want to make a good red wine, for me, there's no option. And actually anybody that really knows wine will tell you that there's no option. I know it's so much easier to just get the juice and throw the yeast in and the sulfite and just let it go. And you know what? You'll make a pretty decent beverage that way. But you're not going to make a full character red wine that way. It just isn't going to happen. I think doing it that way is lazy. I mean, now for a home winemaker, I understand. You know, it's not cheap to buy the equipment, but you know what? There's other ways to get around that. Okay. So basically, there's a couple different ways. So the first step, if you're making a wine from grapes, is to crush and destem the grapes. Now, at our place, what we have these big bins in the back that our crusher destemmer goes over the top of it. We turn on, we plug it in, and we put the grapes in the top, and they crush, and the seeds and the skins and the juice fall through into a big bin. There's some bats on this axle that pushes the stems down the other side. Now, before I had that more elaborate apparatus, I used to do it a cheap and easy way. Actually, I shouldn't say cheap and easy, a cheap and hard way. I mean, obviously, there's one way to do it. You can actually foot crush your grapes, and it's perfectly acceptable to get just a big bin and just start walking in it until it's all crushed. And then what you have to do is you really need to take the stems out, because the stems are very astringent and they will give your wine some off flavors. Now, when you run it through the crusher stemmer, there are always a few stems left over, but not too many. And we only, Katie and Beth, when they were young, they only stomped wine by foot once. Okay, go ahead. So anyway, we only stomped on them once. They were probably about 8 or 9 years old at the time. But what I used to do is I would put my grapes in a big container, and I would get one of these paint stirrers that go on your drill, and I would just turn on the electric drill and let it just crush everything, and then by hand we would take out all the stems, and then we'd ferment it that way. The nice thing when I first started making wine, and every time I talk about wine, I always have to go back to Doug Moorhead. Doug is a guy, and most of you that have talked to me about wine before, Doug is the guy up in Erie, up at Presque Isle Wine Cellars, that actually taught me to make wine. And what they used to do is they sold all the equipment, they sold the grapes, they sold the juices, they sold everything. But what they would do is if I bought grapes from Doug, I could go back on his pad, concrete pad behind his winery, and he let me use his crusher stemmer. And so what I would do is I'd bring my pickup with some big containers in the back of the pickup, and I'd crush and stem the wine. I'd clean the equipment when I was done, and off I go. So that's another option for some of you that don't, that you really don't want to invest. And I mean, investing in a basic crusher stemmer and a small press would probably run, the better part of $1,000. Use probably the better part of $500. But if you know a really, really, really nice guy that makes wine, that's a commercial winemaker, that would actually let you pull your truck up behind his garage where he makes his wine. I don't know any guys like that, but there are people like that around, and would actually let you just run your stuff through his crusher stemmer, hose it off when you're done, and I mean he's usually in there anyway, making his wine in September and October, so it really would be no problem. And like I say, there are people that will do that. I'm probably one of them. But anyway, seriously, for our friends, I mean, the friends and customers and people that come here, I would be happy to let you come back and run your stuff through my crusher or stemmer, and actually through my press. So getting back, okay, so after the wine is crushed and it's sitting in a bin, a small bin, big bin, or whatever, the first thing you do, and this is key, and there are people that will tell you, these organic crazies, the hipster doofuses, that tell you, oh, you don't want to put any sulfite in your wine. Bullshit. There is some controversy over using sulfite in wine, but none of that controversy is with the commercial winemakers. So anyway, as I was saying, the sulfites, are only controversial among hobbyists and some crazy hipster doofus commercial winemakers. Most of the commercial people, 99% of the commercial people use sulfites, and they'll tell you why. Because you really want it to get what you want out of the wine, you really want to control which yeast is the dominant yeast in your wine, or not only the dominant yeast, only yeast in your wine. So basically what we do is after we crush, we put sulfite in, and the first dose of sulfite is usually a double dose, because especially in red wines, some of the organic material in red wines will bind up a lot of the sulfite. So if you put in 100 parts per million, you're only going to get about 50 parts per million in free sulfite. And 50 parts per million will pretty much, we use a table, but 50 parts per million of sulfite will pretty much take everything out of the wine that you don't want in there. So then after 24 hours with the sulfite, we put in our wine yeast. And there are a lot of sources. I mean, a real good source for everything on wine yeast is Scott Labs, scottlab.com. And they have hundreds, or at least 100, or maybe a couple hundred different kinds of yeasts. Now we use one that we call, for most of our reds, we use one we call BM 4x4, which is a yeast that really extracts the maximum amount of color and the maximum amount of character and tannins and everything out of the grapes. So basically what we do is so after 24 hours we put in our yeast, and then 3 or 4 times a day what we'll do is we'll push the cap in. And what you'll find is when you're fermenting wine, the skins will rise to the top, but what you want to do is you want to maximize the contact between the skins and the juice to get the most out of the skins. So 3 times a day we take, it's a long pole with a flat metal piece that we just kind of push down like this and get all the skins back into the wine. After about an hour or so, they're back up on top. But if you do it 3-4 times a day, you're going to get all the character that you can out of the wine. And I say 4 days to a week. Some people go 2 weeks. I found 4 to 5 days, you pretty much get the character, the maximal character you're going to get out of the wine. So next step, after after fermenting them on the skins for 4 days to a week or so, is to press the wine. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the old wine presses that had a big piston on the top and the oak staves on the side. And that's what we used for years. But over the last couple of years, we've kind of graduated to a higher tech, and this thing is awesome. We've gone to a bladder press. And what this bladder press does is there's basically essentially an inner tube on the inside, and then there's a round stainless steel mesh with little holes in it. So what we do is we put the grapes in, put the top on, screw the top on tight, and then we hook some air into it, and it expands the bladder, and it pushes the juice out the sides. We have to put a plastic bag over the press because the juice will go everywhere, but the plastic bag, and we also put it, to keep things clean, we put it into a big vat that's basically, I got it from Farmer's Supply, that we use for, or that they use for feeding, or for watering cows, basically. And then we put a submersible sump pump inside there, and when it gets up and it sets the pump off, it pumps it right into our tanks. I think I'm going to stop for there. The tanks are the next, oak and all that kind of thing. But again, I mean, this is phase one. It's actually very easy to do, but you really have to be really, really obsessive about it, because a little bit of mistake and you basically ruin your wine. Back in the old days when I was a private winemaker, I wasn't so careful, because you know what, if I screwed up 5 gallons of wine, I just threw it away and waited till next year and went to the state store and bought some wine and drank it until I had some more of my own. But winemaking is, I think, both an art and a chemistry, or a biochemistry. These are living organisms you're working with, and you really have to be able to manipulate some. Now, additives-wise, some winemakers will put shit like cinnamon in it, all those garbage. We don't do any of that. I mean, basically everything we get is 100% grape. And when you come in here and we say, this one has, like this one here, Tannat, has a little bit of a leather character to it. I didn't put a Belgian in there and sit it in there. I mean, this is the leather is the chemicals in the wine, or blueberry, blackberry. They'll say, this is blackberry tones. We don't put blackberry in. It's the same chemicals that are in blackberries that are in grapes, and different grapes have different chemicals, and they give you different characters. So anyway, that's it for this one, and thanks for watching. I'll probably come back in another week or two with my first phase of white wine. Thanks.